I'm here with Dominic Gates, reporter for the Seattle Times. Dominic is also the 2020 Pulitzer Prize winner for reporting for the investigative stories he did on the Boeing 737 MAX. And he is here at the FDA Joint Regulatory Conference, and he just gave a presentation on quality and the importance of quality and the issues that came up at Boeing and unfortunately are still ongoing at Boeing. So welcome to On the Issue. First off, I want to congratulate you on all your achievements and awards. Winning the Pulitzer Prize is extremely impressive, and you must be so proud.
I am. It's top prize in journalism. I'm very happy to have achieved it.
It is really impressive. I know a lot of people are going to watch this video who are in journalism, and they're going to be jealous. And they're going to be jealous especially because they're going to find out you didn't start off as a journalist. You have a degree in mathematics, and you actually taught mathematics for a number of years. So what are you doing on our side of the business here, in the business world? Well, how's a guy who's mathematics, how'd you get into words? And not only on our side, you win awards. Is it a path you'd recommend aspiring journalists to take?
Well, it wasn't a deliberate path, perhaps, but the fact is, in high school, I was originally focusing on English and words, and then at some stage in my high school career, I got a poor English teacher and a super mathematics teacher, and I just sort of switched tracks. But I've always read a lot. I've always read a lot of news. I grew up during the Troubles in Northern Ireland and did publish a couple of pieces there, political pieces and pieces about the Troubles. Wasn't paid for them because I didn't know how the business worked, and I got lucky. I got into journalism because in my teaching career, I ended up going with an Irish government development program to teach in Zimbabwe. I taught there for 3 years, and I met the woman who's now my wife, an American, who was traveling around Southern Africa as a freelance journalist, writing for American papers, and I thought that was the most romantic thing I could possibly imagine. And she taught me what freelancing meant, how to actually do it, which I had to do since I had no credentials when I came to the United States. I had to freelance for a long time, and learned how the business worked and how to pitch stories, and so
it's really impressive. So she gave you that education you missed by studying for the mathematics degree.
Yes, exactly.
So you started in with the Seattle Times. It says about 20 years ago, I see, and you've been on the aerospace beat ever since. So what I'm curious about is what drew you to the aerospace industry? Why was that attracted to you to be a reporter about that industry?
Well, I was just very lucky to get this particular job. I mean, to be the aerospace reporter at the Seattle Times is one of the great aerospace jobs in aviation journalism, because Seattle's where Boeing builds all its planes. Seattle Times has won 2 Pulitzers for Boeing work before I got the third one. So I'd always been interested in planes. When I was a boy, I read books about pilots and things, but I didn't have any particular expertise. And I came to Seattle. Boeing was one of the big industries, and I was very, very lucky to get this job. And it's a wonderful, wonderful beat. I love the people, and I get to talk to the blue-collar guys who make the planes, the white-collar engineers who design them, the executives who run the business. You get every possible strata of society, and it's just and of course the factories are awesome. The machines they make are incredible.
Yeah.
So I find, like I said, I started off covering Microsoft for 18 months, and there's no comparison when you're writing. It's so difficult to write about software.
Yeah.
But when you walk into a Boeing factory and you see these awesome jetliners,
it's very tangible. It's there, right?
Right.
It sounds like you were right in there on manufacturing issues, quality, or am I wrong? Or were you doing more like financial reporting?
No, not so much financial reporting. My focus at the beginning was the cultural shift at Boeing that had happened after the McDonnell Douglas merger, which was in 1997, 6 years before. That merger did change the culture of Boeing. It became much more bottom line focused after that. The leadership changed. And so in the first years when I was covering this speed, I was focused a lot on, for example, they did a lot of outsourcing. And they took a lot of work away from the Puget Sound region. And they fought the unions in the Puget Sound region. They began to alienate their own workers in the central headquarters. I mean, they moved the headquarters from Seattle to Chicago. They recently moved it again to Washington, D.C. now.
Yeah.
But that was a huge culture shock because they have tens of thousands of employees, blue collar and white collar engineers, whose families have worked at Boeing for generations.
Yeah.
And suddenly the bottom line mattered more than the loyalty to those people, and shifting work to lower non-union states, shifting work to lower cost operations. This was the focus of a lot of the stories that I did early on. I always counted myself very lucky. My predecessor in the job had to go in the mid-90s to airplane crashes that happened in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I always counted myself lucky that I never had to do that because there hasn't been one.
That's right, yeah.
There has not been a large commercial airliner that's crashed in the United States. Not a Boeing one. There was the Colgan Air. That was a much smaller plane. But in all the time I've been doing it for 20 years, aviation's been extremely safe. And there were crashes overseas.
That's right.
But
yeah.
often they were really old planes, very bad weather,
right.
very poorly trained airlines.
Right, or mysterious conditions like the plane in the Indian Ocean, which we still don't know what happened.
Well, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is that for most of the time, unfortunately, when those crashes happened overseas, the focus wasn't Boeing's design and manufacturing. It was something else.
Right.
That's why when the first MAX crash happened, suddenly this looked totally different. I mean, I didn't have to go to it. We don't have the budget to send me to Indonesia. But we knew immediately, the weather was perfect. It was a brand new jet. It had just rolled out of the factory 4 months earlier. This was something different. And when Boeing, just 6 days after the crash, put out a bulletin about this new flight control system malfunctioning. That was like a red flag to everybody in the aerospace world. Like, there's something really different happening here.
So would you say, looking back now, and it's interesting, you came in 6 years after the culture was shifting, the supply chains were changing, they were starting to move around manufacturing. How much of that contributed, do you think, or do you know, to what ended up happening?
I think it contributed a lot. I think, unfortunately, Boeing's leadership lost touch with its own people. And it basically, when I started in 2003, 6 years after that merger, Boeing had been laying off people for those 6 years. They had laid off 50,000 people before 9/11, another 50,000 after 9/11. By the time I started the job in 2003, I could hardly talk to any Boeing employee in the Puget Sound region who didn't hate management, who didn't consider that the new influence from McDonnell Douglas was ruining the company and that they no longer respected their own workers. Now, actually, soon after I started, they finally launched a new airplane. They'd been losing ground to Airbus, and they launched the 787, their first all-new airplane, for many years. And so they did begin hiring again. But unfortunately, they did not give up this sort of adversary relationship with their own workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And so they fought the engineers, they fought the machinists, and they outsourced work. And every time they started a new model, including the MAX, they threatened the workers with, we're going to build it somewhere else, unless you make concessions to us, unless the state gives us some tax breaks. This happened with the 787 for the very first time. They actually held a competition. Where are we going to build this new airplane?
I see, right.
They never built planes anywhere else. So that immediately set up a terrifically hostile relationship with their own workers. They'd suffered mass layoffs, and now Boeing was saying, well, we might build this plane somewhere else. What was this saying to their workforce? Now, I think the alienation of your own workforce, how can that not affect quality? How can that not affect the safety issues? And unfortunately, even though they did launch, they held the competition, in the end they picked Puget Sound to build it again after they got enormous tax breaks from the state.
Right, of course, right, yeah.
And they did begin hiring again, but they kept up. Every time there was a new model like the MAX, they did the same thing again, threatening to move. 777X, threatening to move.
Wow.
The union had to give up their traditional pensions in order to get them to say, we're going to build a 777X here. So I think if you make adversaries of your own workforce, you've got a real problem. And then you're relying on all those people to give you the quality that's required.
And after you kind of beat them up a little bit, now you want them to do their best.
It all became a bottom line, whatever costs less.
So do you think this bottom line focus also impacted the culture around quality itself? Let's forget about the relationship with the employees, which is extremely critical. But how about, do you think management wasn't making the right signals anymore about quality?
Well, they were sending as I talked about during the presentation, they were sending signals, and the signals were, we've got to cut costs. And quality, they had this program called Quality Transformation, which involved eliminating quality inspectors.
I see,
So they were sending very strong signals that I think reduced the quality oversight. And they're suffering immensely from that right now.
Still to this day they're suffering.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing was the 787 fuselage gaps, which ended up, they had to park billions of dollars worth of airplanes for over a year, for 19 months, I think it was. 100 planes just sitting there waiting to be repaired. But it's affected all their programs, and this year we've had repeated quality escapes, they call them, notice of escapements, and each time it's happened, it has stopped deliveries. And it's, financially, it's a total disaster. You think you're saving money on this?
Yeah. I clearly, it's just a way to maybe speed up production or something, but I don't think it's going to result in savings. And then you talked about simultaneously, I was able to listen in to your session today. You talked about simultaneously the FAA started changing its approach to oversight.
Well, to be fair to the FAA, they were forced to do it by Congress.
Yeah.
Congress was, of course, lobbied very heavily by the aerospace industry, by Lockheed, by Boeing, by all the big players. And Congress forced the aerospace industry, forced the FAA to delegate oversight to the manufacturers. In other words, self-oversight.
And this happened before
it happened.
The problems with the MAX.
It has happened.
The tragedy, we should say.
Yes, it has happened. It's been happening for decades, and they've just delegated more and more and more from the agency to the manufacturer. and that process that trend reached its peak a month before the first crash with the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018, which required manufacturers to delegate to the manufacturers all oversight unless they could justify keeping parts of it. Any part they wanted to keep for themselves, they had to justify it.
I see.
This was all done because the lobbyists had convinced senators and members of the House that America was at a disadvantage compared to Airbus. Airbus was doing so well, and Boeing wasn't doing so well. So we need to help Boeing. We need to help them get their planes certified faster.
Right.
Let them do the oversight. Stop holding them back. Stop putting red tape around our great icon of American industry. Congress swallowed that. The FAA was therefore forced to do that.
Right. And now you say it's kind of reversed a little bit since the tragedy, but you never know. It could happen again in the future. Let me see. I don't like to conjecture, but what do you think would happen if any industry all of a sudden the oversight shifted from the government to the companies? I mean, is it almost inevitable that there would be sort of slippage?
Well, let's. It's not quite that simple. You have to understand, as I mentioned in the presentation, there are thousands of Boeing employees, several thousand, whose job is to do this oversight on behalf of the FAA. So they are paid by Boeing, but they are technically working for the FAA. The people chosen for that role, that's been done for years.
Right.
This delegation has gone on for years. And the people chosen for that role are typically the most experienced engineers who are chosen not only for their engineering ability, but also for their integrity and for their spine. They are chosen.
They're supposed to be tough.
They want people to be able to stand up to a manager and say no. And traditionally, those people at Boeing have done a good job.
Right.
But when you get business pressures, for example, in that last FAA Reauthorization Act, one of the changes they made was that this organization within Boeing communicates with the certification office within the FAA. And traditionally, the engineers doing the work for Boeing could call up the FAA safety engineer directly and just talk about some issue and say, we got this, we have to test it, how do we need to do it? And they would agree. The FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 changed the rules. Those engineers could no longer talk directly.
Okay.
The manager of the organization within Boeing could talk to the manager within the FAA, but not the direct frontline engineers. Those managers were under business pressure. The business pressure of schedule and cost.
Right.
With this certification of this new airplane, we're in a race against Airbus here. It has to be done on time and it has to be done at lower cost. So that kind of change, you've got these people with great integrity and great ability trying to do their best. But if you change the structure of the organization with changes like that, you allow business and financial concerns to suddenly start having much more say than they did in the past.
Yeah. Well, this is really a fascinating story. It's a tragedy, though, first and foremost. And if people want to learn more, not only can they go back and look at the articles you publish with a team of authors. You won the Pulitzer for these articles. I believe you have something on Amazon coming out about this, Amazon Prime.
It's already out.
It's out now.
It's a documentary. It's called Flight Risk. Yes, I worked with the documentary team. They did a fabulous job. I recommend.
Yeah, I would recommend. I think our viewers, the people who read the PDA letter and watch our videos, they're all into quality. That's their job. Pharmaceutical industry does place a high premium on quality, and generally, I think our industry is doing a great job. But these are great lessons. Whenever there's a quality problem in any industry, there's something that can be learned. Mm-hmm. So I hope our viewers and our readers and the PDA members will view this documentary. I know I'm going to. I have Amazon Prime, so I'm going to watch it. And I do appreciate you taking your time to come here to the PDA FDA Joint Regulatory Conference. The audience was engaged with your talk today. We had a full room and lots of questions. So really, on behalf of everyone, I thank you for coming. And we look forward to reading more stories about the aerospace industry and Boeing. And now I'm going to follow this story really closely because I find it really interesting, all the things I've learned today.
Thanks,
Thank
Walt.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.